Sure.
Hi, Todd. Welcome to Freshly Pressed. How are you
Hi,
today?
Saurabh. How are you? I'm doing great. Thank you.
I'm doing great as well. Let's today we're just talking about what inspires you and what got you into comics and all the pop culture references that you have in your books and all things comics, I guess. So yeah, before we go into any of that, can you tell us a bit about yourself and how you got into comics?
Yeah, for sure. Well, this is definitely a side gig for me. My full-time job, I own a business. Believe it or not, I'm a teddy bear designer,
Ooh,
importer, and distributor.
that's
So
amazing.
yeah, basically it's a family business and we're on the internet and a lot of our customers are mom and pop flower shops, gift shops, charities, and governmental agencies. And we just bring in teddy bears and stuffed animals and then send them out. And that's essentially what puts food on the table. But at the same time, I've always considered myself to be a storyteller, and I've always wanted just to tell stories. I've written a children's book series about a couple of dogs that I've owned, sort of inspired by my two children. Wanted to have something for them to read
That's
growing
awesome.
up. And then with Don't Tell My Wife I'm a Cult Leader, believe it or not, it's been an ongoing project for, believe it or not, like 17 years. And
Wow.
that doesn't mean like, all it, like every day, but essentially back in 2005 or so, I just wrote this treatment to be an animated series. I wanted it to be a cartoon.
Right.
And I actually made it. About 6 years later, premiered it, rented at a theater here in Dallas, played it, got the attention of some people, um, signed a joint venture contract with one of the co-creators of Jimmy Neutron Boy Genius
Right.
and a manager and then this guy in LA, and we were shopping it around and was able to pitch it to Fred Seibert, who was the executive director of I think it was called Adventure Time. Remember that cartoon,
Oh
Adventure
yeah.
Time?
Oh yeah.
And so I pitched it to him. He was like, "All right, this is great." And then he was like, "So tell me about yourself." And he found out that me and my creative partner were basically we had families and we were had careers. We weren't willing to just twist off and go to New York or LA and work for peanuts while we learned the ropes and then maybe had our pilot greenlit on a YouTube channel 3 years from now. So it just went like that. And then we kind of waited around and we decided, okay, how about this, man? We did the pilot. It took years and tens of thousands of dollars. How about we do a graphic novel? It'll
Mm,
be much cheaper and it'll be much easier. And so at the same time, like, hey, we're a little bit older now, we're not as cool as we once were because we're not trying
yeah.
to be cool anymore. So what are we gonna do about that? Because we're just not cool. He's like, this is what we'll do. I was like thinking that we should set it in the 90s because that's when we all were growing up. I'm 46, and so 94, 95 is when the comic book is set, and I was like 18 or 19.
Mm,
So like let's set it then. We can draw from nostalgia and all that, and let's do it. And then he countered with, "How about this? We set in the '90s, but then we have the current day where he's reminiscing, and we're like, that's it. That's the thing we're going with." So we set out, and about a year later, my creative partner, who had been with me since the beginning, he was the artist. I'm the writer. He was like, "Hey man, I can't do this anymore." He was going through some life stuff, and I was like, "Okay, man, if you ever want to come back, let's do it." And I just sort of put it on the side, did
yeah.
some other stuff, and then the person who did my children's book illustrations, she was also doing some advertising for my company, the teddy bear company. She was like, "Let me have a go at it. I have some ideas. Let me do it." I'm like, "All right, let's do it." So she's an animator out of the Philippines, and so I just
Right.
send her my script and send her mock-ups of the pages, and then she comes back with the drawings, and we just kind of do it like that. So that's
That's awesome.
essentially, I'm wanting to tell stories, and it just happens to be that a comic book is the right format for this at the moment.
Yeah, yeah.
You know,
No, that's great. I think a lot of people believe in that. I was listening to this talk from, do you know Taika Waititi, the director of Thor, Love and Thunder, and Thor Ragnarok? Those
no,
last two
no.
Marvel
I mean,
movies.
I'm familiar, but yeah. Anyway,
Yeah. So he was giving a TED talk, and this was way back when he was not directing Marvel movies. And he
mhm.
was telling like movies is just another medium, you know, it could be like he just wants to make art, and it could be on a canvas or a comic book or movies, you know, it could be anything. So yeah, I love that attitude because you know it's it's a way to tell a story, and whatever way
Yeah,
works for you is the best way, right?
yeah. There's even with my business. There's a book. It's called "Building a Story Brand." The idea of turning your business into a story where your customer is the lead character. A lot of
Right.
people run their business where they're the lead. They're like, I've been in business since 19, whatever, and we did this and we did that. Instead, it's like, hey, you're the lead. You're like, hey, if you buy from us, you will be the star of the show. Everyone's going to love you. You're going to be known as the person who knows quality and all that kind of stuff. So we
Nice.
sort of retool the website and our avatar for that. So like if you read the copy, it's all about your customers will love this, or just things where we put the emphasis on them. So a story can be interwoven anywhere,
Yeah,
even a business, even a small family run business.
that's awesome. Yeah, I think that's a great idea. Cool.
But as far as like, influences, I never really grew up reading a lot. I grew up reading a lot, but not so much comic books, but definitely The Far Side. That one, the with Gary Larson. Yeah.
Yep, yep.
So The Far Side, I could basically, you could show me a caption from The Far Side. I can tell you what's in the picture, or I could see the picture and tell you what the caption is. Like I just read it so often. And Calvin and Hobbes, and basically just all the funnies that you might read, and what they put in newspapers
Yeah, yeah,
back in the day,
yeah.
and other things, just stuff that really informed my sense of humor. People say it's a little bit twisted, a little bit dark, very dry. So part of that is probably, from my family, but part of it is just from what I've read and taken in.
It doesn't come off at all like that in the book. It's good dry humor. There's a lot of sarcasm, and there's there's a whole lot of I think the humor is in the situation itself in the book. So
Yeah,
yeah, and how it flows, you know, like how Floyd flows through the world, and you know those kind of things. So yeah, I think your humor is great. The writing's great in the book. It that's I think the big strong suit of the book as well. I love how the art, the color palette changes between the periods, and you know those kind of things to show you're changing a different period and things like that. And I also love how Texas is actually a character in the book. It's
yeah. Thank you.
I have a like when I was reading it, I felt the shadow of Texas looming large on rest of the story.
Yeah, and like so many, especially folks from not from the United States, like Texas has an outsized reputation, and almost all the times it's pretty wrong. People, when I went to Spain, I spent the summer in Spain as part of a like a not a foreign exchange, but just a study abroad program. And our group was invited to go to a pub one night, and we show up, and all the bartenders have cowboy hats and fake six shooters and all that. And we're like, what's going on? This is supposed to be like a pub. They're like, oh, they heard a bunch of people were coming in from Texas, and that's why they dressed up. And I was like, okay, we're from the city. Yeah, there's a few cowboys here in the country that might carry, strap a piece on their side, but we're just regular city folk here.
Yeah, yeah. Everyone's not a rancher in Texas, right? So
Yeah. I mean, especially, it's funny, like basically like you're in Sydney, which is a giant, multinational, multicultural complex, and basically every big city in the United
yeah,
States Uh, the only thing different in a lot of the ways, it might be the architecture and the age of the city, but I probably have more in common. My outlook is probably more in common with someone from Chicago or New York than someone in the country 200 miles away in Texas,
That's very,
right?
very true.
Because they grew up in a small town. A lot of the folks are very similar to one another, and so on. That's not to say that, morally they're wrong or whatever, but just their outlook is quite different.
Yeah, 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 very true. And Texas also has this whole like it has a very rich history. Some of which is obviously a bit troubled, but like it's still a very like it has a very rich history of its by itself. And there you can draw a lot of like if you have seen a lot of movies or a lot of shows about different aspects of history of Texas, this one in particular hasn't been spoken about that much. So it's great that you draw inspiration from a chapter of history that hasn't been spoken about a lot.
Yeah, yeah. If you're referring to, we all people know about the Civil War, and
Yeah.
to me, that's one of the most exciting aspects of American history, especially if you're reading, like I'm reading right now, a biography of Frederick Douglass, who I think is probably one of the greatest, if not the greatest, American. And you see how, like, all right, he was born a slave, 1818. When he was 20, he escaped it, and then he became an abolitionist in New England. But no one knew that there would be that slavery would be abolished within a generation, or that there would be a civil war, or that during the Civil War that maybe people thought, hey, let's just let them have the South, we'll have the North. No one knew it
Mm-hmm.
was happening. So it was a very exciting, I mean, exciting when I say exciting, a very action packed time in American history because everyone was living it, not really sure what was going to happen. And like there was a bunch of abolitionists who were, let's free the slaves, but let's move them to Panama afterwards, right? Almost like with the American Indians, let's get them off, like send them way off west. So that was the case where you had abolitionists, and they meant well. They were like, look, after they're freed, the South isn't going to accept them. And
Mm-hmm.
the Northerners are racist too. They're not going to accept you. So why don't you guys go to Panama? The climate is more in line with your dark skin. And Frederick Douglass, his retort to that was, oh, if we're talking about climates, then maybe you guys need to go back to Europe. And, sure, we'll go back to Panama. So he was way ahead of his time when it came
Yeah.
to like with his rhetoric. It was
Yeah.
pretty awesome. But with the Civil War in Texas, not many people know that, like all the counties got to vote on whether or not to stay in the Union or not. And that's essentially how West Virginia, the state, became West Virginia. Enough of them seceded, voted against it to were like, hey, let's form our own state here. And so
Yeah.
in Texas, in Hill Country, the ones that were run by German immigrants, they were like, we never had slaves. We don't want to fight for this country. Please leave us out. But that wasn't good enough. Even the father of Texas, Sam Houston, he was against secession. They didn't kill him; they just exiled him,
Mm.
essentially.
Mm.
So these German settlers, they try to leave, and that was one of the massacres. Was like on their way out, they were killed, and I gave a fictionalized version of that in chapter 2, and tied that into Floyd's saga, 100 and whatever it is, 30 years later.
30 years later, yeah. And that was very fascinating. It was very fascinating because like I had never read about German settlers in during the Civil War era uh ever before. So yeah, great. Uh there's I think the book is also like rife with a lot of pop culture references and like uh there's is that Jeff Bezos in chapter one who shows up and talks about some kind of tech guru who and
Oh yeah, no, that was some random guy. I just where Floyd is crashing a party and some random
yeah,
dude says,
yeah,
"Hey man, let me yeah." That's a good idea. I should have made him like maybe Michael Dell or something like that. Like, show how Floyd is influencing
yeah,
history and all that. I am kind of going with that. Basically, there's going to be 4 cult members that join up, and you didn't get through chapter 5, but we have the military the vet,
Yep.
Smed, and then we have
Smith.
the teenage runaway,
Mm,
who Libby, and then we're going to have a Cajun ex-con, so
right.
someone from Louisiana, who goes to prison for a crime he did not commit, and then the last one's going to be an African immigrant, maybe from South Africa.
All right.
So all that's sort of going to come together and form Floyd's group.
Right.
And then
Right.
once that ends, I think that will be a good denouement for volume 1, and I'll bind it and then
Yeah.
see what happens and really try to market that. I've
Nice.
realized that it's very hard to market individual issues, even if I go around to all the comic books in Dallas, having to service them and then get them done in time enough to where, chapter 7 comes out every
Mm,
month, or, very hard. But if I had like a thick volume and said, hey, here's a complete story, this is something you can sink your teeth into.
yeah.
Now let's talk about funding volume 2.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
even trying to advertise, like, you're going to spend probably $10 to get someone to buy a comic for $5,
That's very,
unless you
very
just get
true.
really lucky. And that's part of it. I mean, a lot of companies know that they're going to lose money the first year or two,
Yeah.
but most people can't afford to just throw their money down a
Done.
pit for 2 years, especially if they don't know exactly what's working and what's not working.
Exactly.
So you can totally go broke trying to market your book.
I totally agree on that. And printing books is actually quite expensive. And with, like with all the rising costs of both the paper, printing, distribution, it can become a really expensive thing to even start with. I think that's why like
Yeah,
Kickstarters and a lot of these crowdfunding models are picking up really well, right? In last few years, like they've gone from strength to strength. And it takes a bit
yeah,
of a
that's
risk. Yeah. Yeah, sorry, go for it.
yeah, I agree. I'd love to give that a try. I've been, on Twitter and trying to learn from what people are doing. And I supported one. It was called Twilight Custard, and it's basically it's set in cowboy times in the 1800s, during the Mexico-American War, where
Yeah,
like a robot alien falls onto Earth. And watching him do with his Kickstarter, and I think he tried really hard, but maybe got about 50 backers, I guess.
yeah,
So it's just like, how do you? And everyone laments, oh, if only I was a girl with ample bosom and I could show that off, then I'm sure I could sell a lot. I'm like, yeah, that sounds like a bad excuse. So
mm.
you do what you can do. The problem with me is that I'm not making like a bunch of different books. Like, this is the only one. So
Yeah,
like, if I were going to give advice to a writer, let's just say someone like is 20 years old, just has a little bit of experience writing, I'd be like, all right, this is what you do: write a bunch of stories in a bunch of different genres, then pitch them. And what you'll do is you'll find someone says, well, this is good, but I'm not doing sci-fi right now. I'm really looking for a rom-com. And they're
yeah,
like, okay, well, I have a rom-com too. Here you go. And like, yeah, this is perfect. Then 2 years later, it'll be like, hey, didn't you have a sci-fi? We're looking for sci-fis now. That's
yeah,
essentially what happened to the creator of Mad Men.
yeah,
He had Mad Men ready to go. He was a writer on The Sopranos,
right.
and then after The Sopranos ended, he was like, "Hey, I was a head writer for The Sopranos. Check out this thing. It's called Mad Men," and
Yeah,
then it took off. So
yeah,
sometimes you have to sit on something for a while. Same thing with Breaking Bad.
mm,
Like, people are like, "Ooh, I don't want to like a speed dealer, like, who, no way, we're not touching that." But after
yeah,
all of these dark dramas started coming out, like, hey,
mm,
that's perfect for what we're trying to do.
yeah. You have to wait
So
for the
it
right
requires a
place
little
and
bit
the
of
right time.
patience.
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
Yeah. 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 And that's exactly right. And then again, if you just have one bullet in your chamber, like myself, don't expect to have an overnight success. But if you
absolutely.
write and have lots of different topics, your chances of success will be a lot greater than if you were just concentrating on one particular title, your baby, if you
Yeah.
will.
Yeah, and what you mentioned earlier about like the reason that you gave for not not being that successful is actually quite wrong, because I know that a lot of people who run Kickstarter work endlessly to get to the point where they get like 120 backers on like a pre-campaign trade, you know, like they haven't even kicked off the campaign and they have 100 backers on day one. And even to do that, they have to engage with their community. They have to be on Twitter or Facebook or, you know, on Instagram all the time, trying to promote their upcoming campaign. It's a lot of hard work, you know. You just can't get it overnight. And
Yeah.
that's, and you know, like a lot of them, they do issue based, like number of like this. They do like what, issue one campaign, and then they gain some momentum for issue two, because people who have bought issue one will look forward to buying issue two. But that's when you have to, your stakes are higher, because you now have to live up to expectations from issue one in terms of both writing and artwork. Plus, you're also marketing to a new crowd who would buy both issue two and one, you know. So it's a fairly complex game, and you just can't simplify it like that, you know. So it's yeah, but like you said, like if you're doing like a single issue thing where you're writing like a big graphic novel and just marketing that, it can be done. It's not impossible.
Hmm.
And you know, but yeah, that's what like I'm also trying to do. I'm actually trying to build like an alternative model for crowdfunding, because by itself crowdfunding is a little flawed, and I want to fix some of the flaws that come with it. You know, like it does give you this traction in advance, where you know that X number of people are actually going to buy your book. But what happens in follow through, you know, what if with issue two you have to go back to the chalking board and do all over that all over again, you know.
Hmm.
And I don't want people to do that. I want people to keep selling their stuff. I want them to build a bad catalog, and then if you're doing the next campaign, just pull from the catalog. Otherwise, if you're in Kickstarter and you have catalog of 15 books, you're actually adding 15 rewards manually again and again and again every time you go in and create a new campaign. And you know, like that takes time, energy, you know, and it's always like it's
Yeah.
diminishing returns. So yeah.
Yeah. I think, with me, I have a website. I'm pretty good at building e-commerce websites. So I just threw one together for my comic. And I have what we call a lead generator. You get on the website, you can read the first two issues for free. All you need to do is subscribe to my newsletter. And the idea is that, okay, now that you're on my newsletter, I can have automated emails going to you to encouraging you to buy the physical copies, or at least, I stay in touch. I try to. That's something, it's like you have to, even though someone loves you, if you don't write to them until 6 months later, they're not going to remember you. No
Yeah.
one's so good that they're going to remember you 6 months from now. So you have to keep up with that list. And like I said, I'm a writer, so I try to write stuff. So I really want to get into the habit of writing to my list once a week, building that up, one or two new subscribers a week. So I'm hoping that like by the end of a certain amount of time, if you have 1,000 subscribers,
Yeah.
and 200 of them are really engaged and who will happily buy your next issue, well, that's a really good start. That's
Yeah.
more than most people.
Yeah.
So that's the idea, but it's not going to come overnight. No famous person on Twitter is going to be like, hey, you guys got to get this thing right now.
Mm,
Um, I don't, maybe that does happen. I know that happens from time to time, but you have to have the infrastructure in place in order to capitalize on that. Otherwise, they're just going to go to your website and click off. That's why I have a lead generator. They may not buy right now, but if I can get their email address, then at least I have a chance of getting to them later.
absolutely. Absolutely. And like you said, like you need to keep having those like authentic conversations with your group of people who actually believed in you and actually gave you their email, right? So you have to keep writing to them. You have to be authentic in all your communications, and you know that's how people will start believing in your work. And it's
Yeah.
a gradual process. It'll get there in
Yeah.
time.
And you learn, like if you, just like anything, you pay attention, you make changes. Like when I first published chapter 1 of this, I got a lot of feedback from the people I showed it to, who I have a bunch of friends who would be honest with me. There's some like, oh yeah, it's great, man, it's great, I love it. But then others will be like, all right, you definitely need you're missing something here. You need a page or two to bridge this thought from this thought. I was like, you know what? I was thinking that, but the pages need to be in multiples of 4. And
Yeah,
if I did that, it would add 2 pages and I'd have to add 2 more, and I didn't feel like
yeah,
doing that. But and like 2 or 3 people told me that. I'm like, okay, that's fine. Then I had another friend for chapter 2. The woman who's writing, I chose a cursive script, and a friend of mine he has Parkinson's, and he's like, I can't read script anymore
mm,
because like my hands are, like this. I'm like, all right, say no more. And then I just changed it to a block font
yeah,
that looks handwritten. And he's like, this is great. Now I can read it. Thank you,
nice.
kind of thing. And showed it to other people. I was like, hey, look, I even hired a comics coach who gave me a lot of great feedback. One of the things he said was the writing is spot on. The art, it doesn't seem like your layouts aren't really in tune with a lot of the major publishing houses. You have too many frames on one page. It goes on like it seems like it's just going to go on for a really long time. That's not really something that can be marketed easily. And it's like, okay, that's fine. What else? And he mentioned, like oh, I don't know, the gutter lengths have to be the same size. So there were some easy
Mm,
fixes
mm,
that after I rejiggered everything, I was like, okay, yeah, this dude was right. And I did some other, like, he's like, you need a frame here, you need a page here, and I did that,
yeah,
and it was a really great improvement. So what's great about starting off small is that you can get some feedback and change it and not confuse everyone, kind of thing.
absolutely,
So
absolutely.
yeah, it's kind of like you probably The Martian, the movie The Martian
Yep,
with Matt Damon.
yep,
The guy who wrote that, he
yeah,
tried to get his book published normally. Everyone turned him down. So he started publishing it chapter by chapter on a blog, and people, all his nerd friends, was giving him nerd advice, and he would make changes to make it more scientific. Then they were like, "Hey, can you put this in the form of a PDF because we don't want to read off a blog?" So he did that. Then they're like, "Hey, this new thing called a Kindle came out. Can you format it for a Kindle?" So he's like, "Okay," and he charged $1, and it blew up. After that, it just
yeah,
blew up. Everyone loved it, and then he got the movie deal, the book deal, and all that.
yeah, yeah,
And so you never know, but like what may happen, but you don't know until you try. You have to try
absolutely,
it. So
absolutely. Cool. What, yeah, I'll get a bit more into like some of your inspirations for your work. Like what are your like the core inspirations that help you guide in your like in your story, in your work? What are some
yeah.
influences there? I
So
do
so
see
I
I
think.
sorry, go for it.
Oh, go ahead. What was that last thing?
Sorry, I just said I just noticed that Emma's satchel has a golden glow to it, and I had like that feeling that it was kind of referring to Pulp Fiction in a way. The
Yeah,
yeah,
definitely Pulp Fiction was a huge influence. Especially, yeah, I kind of cribbed a lot of lines from that. So yes, that was definitely an homage to Pulp Fiction. Definitely Tarantino's 90s movies were a big influence on me as far as pop culture goes. But I like to read a lot of books on religion, economics, intercultural stuff. Those are the kind of things. And as far as like comics go, the one that made me realize that you can tell a story through comics is Persepolis. You know that one about an Iranian woman? It was it was 2 volumes, and they made a movie out of it,
yeah,
an animated movie. But essentially, what was so cool is like, all right, it's just the life of a woman who's living in Iran post-revolution and having to deal with that because it was soon after the revolution. Then she moved to Austria. So now she was this, you know, mid Easterner
yeah,
who is now like in a Western world, and she has a boyfriend who's Western, And then the third part, she moves back. So what was cool is that like she kept on, it was like out of the frying pan and into the fire every time. And it really kept the stakes high a
Yeah.
lot too. And trying, and then also it's just a very simple, it's like she's in a hijab like the entire time, and it's very easy to draw, and you didn't need to have complex beautiful art in order to convey the story.
Yeah.
I know, and so I was like, all right, that kind of gave me permission to do that. I told my artist, I was like, look, let's economize. I don't need fancy art, I don't need shadowing. Let's just produce this thing quickly and economically as possible, reuse some of the poses, reuse, take the same face, just change the facial expression, zoom in, zoom out. That way you're not burdened with having to draw something unique for every single frame, kind of thing. But yeah, I do love biographies, learning about history and art, like Andy Warhol is mentioned
Yeah.
quite
Free
often.
time. Yeah.
And I try to like basically somehow, just synthesize all of these cool things that I think are cool into a zany but coherent story.
Yeah.
About this couch crashing slacker who becomes the adored anti-hero of the apocalypse, and
Nice.
trying to keep that going where people want to know, hey, we kind of see right at the beginning, like the stakes are high. You talk about pop culture, living in Texas, Waco,
Oh, I was about to
1993,
say
the
that.
Branch
Yeah.
Davidian. So I was basically like, all right, let's start off. He's surrounded by the police. He's not getting out alive, or he's not getting out.
Yeah.
So he's just writing his last thoughts. He wants the world to know what really happened. Let
Yeah.
me tell you what really happened. And right away, you can tell that he's writing one thing, but what's happening in the story is something completely different, kind of thing.
Yeah.
So that's what I was kind of going with, is that
Yeah.
type of narration where he's reminiscing about the 90s, and I can talk a lot about the 90s, but I didn't want to make it an overtly 90s comic. I wanted to make a story that was set in the 90s.
Yeah.
Like we've all seen Stranger Things, and to me season 1 was really cool
Yeah.
because it was very subtle and all that, but season 2 they tried too hard.
Oh
And I
yeah.
just remember they set down a bucket of Kentucky Fried Chicken where the old school logo was facing, it was like right front and center. I'm like, no, that's it.
No,
Show's
that's
over. Count me out. Yeah, they try too hard, and that's it. Cancel. No,
Yeah.
I finished that season, but I think I canceled Netflix. I never saw 3 and 4.
Yeah.
But that's what
Even
happens.
things
It's
like,
hard to resist. What's
yeah,
that?
sorry. No, I was just saying, even things like, just they were so overt in second season, just they're wearing them kids wearing Ghostbuster uniforms and things like that.
Yeah.
It's just, yeah, really into your face. But yeah.
Yeah, it's but that's what happens. It's hard to resist that, especially if like you're writing and you're like, what can we do? Let's just have Ghostbusters, that'd be cool. Or you might have some executive who really loved Ghostbusters and gave it the notes. Hey, do me a favor, put Ghostbusters in there, please. Okay, we'll do it, kind of
Yeah.
thing. So it's
Yeah.
hard to know what goes on
I know.
when
I know.
people are doing that.
No, that's so awesome. I really like that. But there was something I wanted to. Yeah, even you even mentioned Jonestown in one of those panels. So I was like, yeah, this is like referencing a lot of cult stuff. Because the starting already feels like Waco, Texas, and then does refer Jonestown as well, somewhere in there.
Yeah, and then to me, like 1997, I was about maybe 21 or so, and there was a cult in San Diego. You probably remember. I don't know how old you are or anything, but basically a bunch of web designers in San Diego all were living in a house. They all ate applesauce laced with like barbiturates, and they drank a bunch of alcohol, put a plastic bag over their head because they wanted to leave their body in order to get on a spaceship that was traveling behind the Hale-Bopp comet. Right, there's a
Wow.
comet coming in, and they're like, let's kill ourselves so that we can get on, we can beam up to this comet, to this starship. And after it all came out, everyone was like, oh my goodness. And the leader, his name was Applewhite. I'm like, this guy is not a very charismatic dude at all. Like, he's just this old guy. And not only that, but he not only convinced them to kill themselves, but a lot of the men, he convinced them to castrate themselves too. And I'm like, wow, like, what do you? And so to me, at the time, 21, like, how does this guy convince? Like, how do you go from, yeah, come check us out, and you're going to have to, lop off your manhood there. That'll help you become more focused.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
everyone went along with it. And the funny thing about him is that people left, usually with cults. Like, if you want to leave, that's really bad. But people left all the time. That's why he was only about a few dozen people were left when the final mission took place. So I
yeah.
just found that very fascinating. And right around the time, I was taking a few Scientology courses.
Mm,
I don't know if that's big in Australia or not, but back in 97, 98, when I was taking them, yes, the internet was around, but it wasn't yet used as a tool where you go to study stuff. So I took a few Scientology courses, and a friend of mine said, "You ought to check out Scientology on the internet." And so you go check them out on the internet. You're like, "Oh my goodness!" So you go back with all these questions about Zanu and this galactic emperor, and they're
yeah.
all like, "We can't talk to you about that." I'm like, "So can I continue about Scientology?"
Sorry. Yeah, let's go
So
again.
I'll continue about Scientology. So after it was confirmed that, Scientology's main thing was this galactic emperor who killed everyone, I was like, okay, kind of count me out here.
Yeah.
But still, it was very. I could see how people really got into it, and to this day, they're still going on strong. They don't have a lot of members, but they still are able to bring in a lot of money because they charge a lot for their courses. It's pretty mind-boggling, but like it's almost like, hey, I have the Bible. You can read Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John for free, but if you want to
Yeah.
read the book of Revelation, that's going to be 30,000,
Yeah. Yeah.
dollars or whatever. So after that, I was like, okay, so that all was very influential. Then I became a Baha'i a few years later, and there's actually a Baha'i temple in I think Ingleside. Is that a like a suburb of Sydney,
Yeah. Yeah.
Ingleside? Yeah,
Yeah.
so that has a very much a world outlook, world citizen. All the world's religions come from the same source. So that really influenced me greatly, where I just look at, all members of the human race as coming from one family. And it really made me interested in all aspects of the world. And that's part of the reason why, I study American history and look at that with a neutral lens, and also just taking in stride the fact that the world has been a crazy awful place for a lot of people for a very long time, regardless of who it is. Everyone's had a chance of being an oppressor. Everyone was enslaved and all that, and not to discount and accept it. Right now America is sort of having a moment where we're trying to think about how do we talk about our past. And I'm
Mm,
sure Australia has the same with all the Aborigines, and what do
yeah.
we do, and we feel awful, how do we go forward, and that kind of stuff. And
Yeah.
all countries have to face that
Yeah.
as well. And I went to Africa over the summer. My wife's family there's a lot of them who live in South Africa and also Eswatini.
Right.
A lot of her family members are buried there, and I picked up a bunch of books there. One of them was a huge history of South Africa, which was fascinating. A lot of parallels between the liberation of South Africa and,
Mm,
of course, the liberation of the slaves here in the United States.
mm.
And Nelson Mandela's biography, which was one of the probably the most uplifting, even though it was such a sad, like so much of his life is prison, it was so uplifting.
Yeah.
So you can take all of this horrible stuff and you can say, yeah, life sucks, you suck, you made this happen.
Yeah.
Or you could turn it around and turn it into this wonderful, uplifting thing for time immemorial. This one moment in the book where it's towards the tail end of his sentence, they're negotiating his release. He's
Mm,
talking with the white powers in charge, and he had learned Afrikaans, right? The language, the Dutch language that the leaders spoke. He had
yeah.
learned it on his own, read a bunch of Afrikaner books, and he was able to talk to them about their own history,
Wow.
saying, if you look at it, really the English and the Dutch, when they were fighting, I don't see that much different than how we as Africans are fighting you. And they're like, well, to be honest, Mr. Mandela, the Dutch and English, that was like a fight among brothers, right?
Mm,
And
mm.
Mandela said, well, I see me and you as brothers too, right? And he was able to like bring down their guard to say,
Yeah.
look, we're brothers too. We just have different skin color, but
Mm.
we're all family here.
Yeah.
And that was really amazing. I was like, all right, this dude right here is probably one of the greatest guys who, from the 20th century, at the very
Absolutely.
least.
Absolutely.
So,
Totally agree.
um, yeah, so I wanted to, bring that aspect, an international aspect, into my comic by featuring an immigrant from Africa who has to deal with being both African
Yeah.
and an African American, because he knows he's African, but the people there, when they see him, they just assume that he's a black guy who, was born and raised here.
Mm.
And I read it was a memoir from an immigrant from the Ivory Coast,
Mm.
and he talked a lot about a lot of the stuff he had to deal with coming here as a dirt broke poor immigrant, and then he finally worked his way up and became a doctor. So he talked about the trials and tribulations, and how at first, being an African, he kind of looked down upon the African Americans and said they just need to work hard and they have to study. They're in a very rich country, and then over
Yeah.
time it mellowed a little bit, and I
Yeah.
think he sort of was able to meet himself halfway.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
okay, there is a lot of prejudice here, but you can't just use that as an excuse to not do anything either.
Mm. Mm. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And all great thoughts, man. I really like the universal brotherhood thing. And I have a friend who's actually he is Baha'i, and he was from Iran. He originated from
Okay.
Iran.
Yeah. Iran. That's where the Baha'i faith started. Uh huh.
Yeah. So he
Yeah.
actually he was a refugee who came to Australia, and yeah, he grew up here, but he's very much his roots are from there. So yeah, like I really love the thoughts behind it. Do you know there's one obviously because Lotus Temple in New Delhi is
Yeah. In
actually a
India.
Baha'i,
Yep.
yeah, is a Baha'i temple as well.
Okay.
Yeah.
And were you born in Australia, or you immigrated, or?
No, I was born in India. I immigrated here a few
Okay.
I think 8 or 9 years ago. So yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, yeah, and so I think that so many of my friends are immigrants too, and you learn so much from talking with them. And
Yeah.
for the most part, I would say 99.99% are very grateful, to be here, because where they came from, it was a lot more difficult.
Yeah.
I remember going to it was like a national day of prayer, and there was a lot of different religions represented. I remember there was like 3 or 4 Islamic sects that I never heard of. They weren't
Mm.
Shia, they weren't Sunni, they weren't the I forget the other one, the one that's sort of like a mystical one. But anyway, they were like very minority type sects.
Mm.
And you could tell that they were really happy. They wore the American pin. They were thrilled to be here because they could practice their religion in relative
Yeah.
peace. Whereas back home, it was like looking over your shoulder all the time.
Yeah.
So, as bad as people think America is, in a lot of ways, there's definitely, a lot of freedom here and relative safety. And, like um, if you kind of sort of like embrace that and, accept American values, then you're probably going to get along with pretty much anyone. I have a Baha'i friend who is of Persian descent, but he was born and raised in Saudi Arabia,
Right.
and he came to the States, and he was afraid people might, like in the country, they might discriminate against him. But a lot of it just had to do with his attitude, and they liked him. They liked him, he liked them, and he was able to make positive change, where over time they're like, man, you've really opened up my eyes to the world. I always thought Middle Easterners were like this, but I now see that they're more like that. It's better than that. So thank you
Yeah.
for all that. And I think we all have the ability to do that,
Yeah.
wherever, whether we're an immigrant or we're native born, we all are an ambassador for our own ethnicity, our own nationality.
Yeah. Very, very true. Very, very true. Great.
And so that's
Great
why I'm
advice.
representing Texas, just having to represent Texas and showing that there's more to it than cowboys and all that, and kind of going like that, and trying to just bring in a lot of international flavors into it, and trying to make it a fun, just a fun romp through the 90s and in this crazy concept of a cult, if you
Yeah.
will, which if you're reading it, it's like, huh, what is this going to be about? When are we going to get to the cult? That's what a lot of people are
Yeah.
like, when are we going to get to the cult? And
Yeah.
I'm like, well, you just have to be patient, man. Have you seen Better Call Saul? I'm like, yeah. It took him like 5 seasons just to like get to the Saul part.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
just
Yeah.
he's like, are you enjoying? He's like, yeah, I'm really enjoying it, but I want to get to the cult. I'm like, well, you have to wait, man.
But that's
So
where the back and forth keeps you hooked, right? The back and forth with the present and the past. When you see the present, you know you'll get there, and when you go in the past, you know that you're in the journey of getting there. So yeah.
yeah, yeah, and the one I'm working on now, which is chapter 6. Like I said, it's going to be a Cajun who goes to prison, and he started off as a snake handler. We
Right.
have churches; they're called signs following churches. They're mostly in Appalachia and Kentucky, but
Mm.
they take snakes into the church and they handle poisonous or venomous snakes,
Wow.
and they also drink poison, rat poison or bleach. And the idea is that there's like, I think it's in the book of Mark, where the true believers will be able to pick up serpents and drink poison and not be harmed by it. And this is a way to show their faith.
Right.
And as you can imagine, sometimes things don't go right, and there's been several of these preachers who end up getting bit by the snake and dying. And
Right.
yeah, and so some have been bitten and they live and they go right back into it, and
Mm.
it's quite fanatic. I mean, one thing like about America, I think just because a lot of people immigrated here for religious freedom, uh, there tends to be a lot of religious fanatics here, and I think America still leads the world as far as Western countries as the most number of people who go to church and who believe in God and all that. So I think that's still something uniquely American or unique about America as far as Western countries go.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Great. We're coming to time, Todd, but yeah, thanks a lot for coming on the show today, and I really really appreciate you sharing your thoughts and influences, and yeah, please do link up to everything about your books, your website and your Twitter handles and things like that, or Instagram, wherever you are, and we'll share it everywhere on our handles as well. And
Okay, yeah, I'll send that all to you. Yeah, and look forward to working with you. On your up and coming. I think your website's launched, but you haven't quite
yeah,
like had your debut kind of thing. You're sort of
yes, yeah. Our
okay.
website's launched. We are kind of aiming Thanksgiving when we're like next week, when we're starting to promote big time for next. The campaign will go on for next couple of months, and we're looking at some like getting some initial creators. We have 3 on the board for it, so more the merrier. getting
Yeah,
getting
well,
yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, I'm sure we'll connect again. We can talk more about that on Twitter. Looks like Twitter is here to stay for another day or two.
Well,
So we'll see
yeah.
about that.
Yeah.
Want to be something if Elon Musk can bring the Twitter workforce down from 7,000 to 300 and still work just fine. That'll really be a wake up call for Silicon Valley. Where if it can work, be just as effective. So uh, I just love what's going on. It's pretty fun watching all of this happen. So,
It's a big dumpster fire, but who doesn't love to watch drama and dumpster fire unfold in real time,
yeah.
right?
Yeah, for sure. I realized I didn't have my screen up for that the last few minutes, so sorry about that. It'll have to be a
Oh,
little bit of
that's okay.
audio.
That's okay. That's
Yeah.
okay. Yeah,
Okay, so well, anything else, or we cover pretty much everything, right?
absolutely. Yes.